Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny exemplifies a modern film business that is obsessed with IP. Whether we are discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Wars, Harry Potter, Mission Impossible, or The Lord of the Rings, movie studios and streaming services are in love with projects and sequels based on pre-existing brands, like say Transformers, or the idea of series that go on forever and never end. See some of the previous examples. If anything, movie studios and streaming services view sequels to projects and series based on pre-existing IP as a way to make money off of that aforementioned pre-existing series or IP in perpetuity, or at least until the heat death of the universe. And with that, when a movie like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny comes along, it's easy to be cynical about the business environment that created this movie. After all, Indiana Jones is a pre-existing IP that has had past financial and critical success. Yet with that said, it's just so damn old. How the IP has existed for over 4 decades at the moment. It's honestly due for a midlife crisis. Hell, even I'm almost due for a midlife crisis. And given that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny exists because the current Hollywood landscape is a business environment that prioritizes making films within the framework of pre-existing IP and can't just let stories end. And due to this, before seeing the movie, I was quite indifferent to Dial of Destiny's existence. Even as someone who loved the Indiana Jones IP growing up and has fond nostalgic memories of it, I was jaded when it came to watching the trailers and learning the existence of this Indiana Jones movie prior to its release, especially given that the previous movie, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, was such a damn shit show to where I would have been okay if there were no more Indiana Jones movies after that. And thus, when it came to realizing that we were going to have another Indiana Jones go-around via the Dial of Destiny, I didn't really care all that much, because honestly, I was already burnt out on the series. As stated earlier, I was cynical about it. But here's the thing, even with all of that baggage aside, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is actually a good film, and more importantly, a good Indiana Jones adventure. And honestly, it works because of its story. This James Mangold directed 5th entry in the series, starring Harrison Ford as the titular character, follows an older Indiana Jones in a changing world. In fact, past the film's introductory sequence, the world is looking towards the future. Hell, the movie is set in the 60s and begins in earnest on the day of the moon landing, a time when the American public was not dwelling on the past, because landing on the moon had us looking to the future. Yet our boy Indy is not one of those people. After all, as an archaeologist, he is a man who prefers to dwell in the past, yet the world and the character have clearly changed. In a classroom setting, Indiana Jones' students no longer want to jump on his bones and are instead just bored out of their mind during his lectures. And seeing as the movie takes place in the 60s, America's and Indiana Jones' fight against the Nazis are over, because obviously, that's how time works. Yet the past never fully dies. When it's revealed that Indiana Jones' goddaughter Helena and a Nazi scientist named Dr. Voller are both battling against each other over a past archaeological relic in the titular Dial of Destiny, and they're fighting over this for reasons that range from profit to potentially locating fissures in time, Indiana Jones springs back into action, gearing up to go on one last adventure. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a good Indiana Jones film. For one thing, it has exciting elements of a grand adventure, fun car chases, and fantastical elements that make for a fun movie-going experience. Yet what makes Dial of Destiny all work together cohesively is its themes. Themes how it pits an older Indiana Jones in a world that has forgotten about the threat of the Nazis and how their ideology can still be dangerous even after World War II. Even after former Nazi scientists integrated themselves into American society and worked on behalf of the US government in order to work on a multitude of projects like rockets and even getting us to the damn moon. Because yes, the movie dives into that ugly fact in American history. And yes, in the 1960s and at the fringe, it was easy to underestimate former Nazis or Nazi ideology, seeing as they were no longer a world-altering threat. The world had moved on. Yet in the movie, Indiana Jones always remembers the threat that Nazism poses. After all, in the real world, Nazism is a fascist, violent, and destructive ideology that can spread if left to fester. While sure, in peacetime it's easy to underestimate Nazism's capacity for cruelty, we must always remember the evil that Nazis embody to their very core. That's they are dangerous. And Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny accurately reflects this point. Despite the war being long over and America's 1960s society had moved on, our main protagonist remembers that a Nazi that still exists is still one that poses a threat that can return if appeased and given the power to do so. And that's a very relatable cinematic angle here, mostly because in the real world, it reflects how far-right fascist movements have returned in recent years in modernity, and that their once fringe nationalist ideology has found a home on the political spectrum of many democratic democratic societies. So yeah, the idea that fascists are aiming to acquire power, all while modern democracies and their citizens have become complacent, is a relevant angle, and Dial of Destiny really hammers that point home, though with the fascists in the movie being represented by the Nazis. And similar to how modern real-life people downplay the dangers of fascism, some characters in the movie downplay the dangers that Nazis pose, especially with the character of Helena, who sees the Nazis less as a threat and more a potential buyer for the artifacts she sells, because honestly she's as if Belloc from Raiders of the Lost Ark was Indiana Jones's goddaughter, which is interesting for 3 reasons. Firstly, because Helena's readiness to sell priceless artifacts in order to make a quick buck causes a lot of emotional friction between her and Indiana Jones. Secondly, since she's a little selfish, there's a lot of room for her character to grow throughout the movie. And thirdly, and more relevant to the topic at hand, she is complacent and ignorant to the threats that post-World War II Nazis pose. Hell, Helena even at one point sees the Nazis as a potential suitor for her wares, ignoring the reality that Indy understands all too well, that if a Nazi wants something, it's in society's best interest to avoid giving it to them, which truly goes for many things, but especially an ancient artifact with mystic abilities, because truly the Nazis probably don't want to use a magical artifact to chickens, because obviously they are still an enemy worth fighting against, and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny gets that relevant point right. Additionally, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is about being old. After all, Indiana Jones dwells on the past a lot in this movie, mostly because, on a base level, he remembers the times where his body could keep up with the demands of the adventurer lifestyle, which is something that I can relate to even though I'm only in my 30s, because let's be clear, repeatedly walking up and down stairs, it's f***ing hard. Yet more importantly, to get back on topic, Indiana Jones has regrets of his past decisions that I admittedly won't spoil here, but they are regrets that he feels a personal sense of sadness about. And admittedly, some folks might view this character turn from Indiana Jones as yet another jaded legacy figure in Disney's collection of jaded legacy figures, see Luke Skywalker and etc. But I honestly don't think Indiana Jones is jaded in this movie. He's just old. I mean, let's be honest, the older you get, it's only natural to think about the past, both the good and the bad, and that's Jones's predicament in this film. He's an old version of Indiana Jones that's willing to go on one last adventure even though his old body and his conflicted mind hold him back, which is just an interesting dichotomy that befits the story and the character at this time. So yes, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a good film, and yet more proof that the best and most relatable Indiana Jones films are the ones where he fights Nazis. And while there are some imperfections, the movie's a little long at 2 hours and 34 minutes, there are minimal hand-to-hand fight scenes featuring Indiana Jones, which to be fair is understandable because Harrison Ford is old. The movie really sidesteps the problematic aspect of how historical items actually do not always belong in a museum, and the introductory sequence involving a young CGI Harrison Ford is awkward and ventured into uncanny valley territory, especially considering that the voice coming out of young Indiana Jones's mouth sounds like an 80-year-old Harrison Ford. Yet with that, I still had a fun time watching this movie. I enjoyed the sense of swashbuckling adventure and appreciated the narrative and thematic avenues that the film explored. I really liked it. And sure, Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade are superior Indiana Jones flicks, Dial of Destiny is still good. It feels modern, yet true to the spirit of the old movies, because truly, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a good Indiana Jones adventure. And with that, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me what you thought of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you onto this credit sequence, and $5 a month allows you to make movie review requests for me to watch and talk about on the Riley and Friends podcast. The link to my Patreon is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my patrons, particularly my high tier ones in Samantha Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.